Okay, everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back. Hope you guys are doing great. It's around 2:26 almost, so we got about 4 minutes until we get things underway today. So good to be with you all. Hope you had a nice spring break. And yeah, just hang in there and be right with you to get the lecture going in just a few moments. Feel free to say hi or tap into the chat whenever you want. Hi, Tina. How are you doing? Good to see you. Moises, welcome back. Derek, good to see you. Just a few more minutes, guys. Hi, Sylvia. Angelina, welcome back. Alicia, hello. Good to see all you guys. Hi, Anthony. Yep, everything's going pretty well. It's nice to have some time off, although to be fair, I didn't have the week completely off because I also teach at another institution which has a different spring break schedule. So I had to go to a few meetings last week, but not as many as I normally would have to over there at Chapman. It's a whole other thing going on at Chapman, okay? Like, so they, after spring break, because California has dipped into the whatever orange tier, I guess, away from the purple tier that we were in with COVID and all that, they're asking the professors to go back into the classroom for like hybrid classes where some students are there and some are back at their dorms watching it on YouTube. So I'd actually had some like in-person face-to-face classes last week for the first time in a year. That was different. In one of the two classes that I teach there, nobody is showing up, even though they're asking us to go. So I'm teaching in an empty, classroom. In the second group, there's a few people, like 3 or 4 people are coming at times, and they're very spread out. And I'm coming in with like masks and a face shield and everything. But I'm not even that worried anymore about the virus, because now I'm fully vaccinated. So I had the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. Didn't really have side effects or anything from that dose or the first one, except for a little soreness in the arm. So I guess, what the statistics and the science says, that 100% of people who get the vaccine don't die or go to the hospital from COVID. So I guess I don't have to worry about the COVID anymore, which is kind of cool. It's a different feeling if any of you have been vaccinated yet after we've basically survived a pandemic. It's just different and weird, going into public places and not being like kind of afraid if you're too close to someone that you're putting your life at risk. So yeah, it's all behind us now in my case. Well, what about teaching in person? I mean, it's a little weird because it's a hybrid format over there. So it's not exactly like the old school teaching in person where you have a full classroom, nor is it like this where everyone's remote. So like some people are there at home and some people are in the room. It's a little distracting, to be honest. It's not an ideal setup. I kind of wish they had just waited till the fall so that we could kind of more fully go back to the in-person thing without all the unvaccinated people and stuff kind of having a status that calls into question whether they should be there. But it is nice to see people again. It's definitely a blast from the past, a memory of times before. But I like the way that we're doing it. I mean, it definitely is disruptive in the halfway point of the semester. Can you imagine that? Like right now being called back to campus while we're in the middle of the class and changing the whole format. So it's definitely a challenge, but I'm doing my best. That's a whole different place though, not to worry for our case. It's just something I'm talking about. So anyway, it's 2:30 now. Good to see all you guys, and thanks again for your attendance and all of your hard work this semester. But we still have some more time together, and we still have some more things to take care of. So welcome back, and try to make sure that you stay consistent, keep arriving to the meetings. You know, it's better, I think, for you to really be in there locked in as the semester closes, because a lot of times there's attrition as the semester goes on. People get a little tired of the heavy schedule or of paying attention or taking clear notes. So you kind of have to almost force yourself to focus a little more, I believe, in the second half as opposed to the first of the semester. But anyway, let's go back to our class. One thing, did some of you guys notice my message delivered this morning by Titanium? Let me know if you did, but basically, just so that you know, in case you haven't looked, I sent off the announcement that I've finished grading the midterm exams, okay? Can you confirm? I think some of you have already kind of emailed me in response to it, so I think that means that for sure it got delivered. But anyway, that notification is just to let you know, yes, the midterms are now scored up. They're all done. I finished them over the weekend and throughout the spring break. So if you're ready for your scores, I'm ready to give you those scores, but the way that I release them is the same way I did with the first essay, based on individual email requests sent to me. So please do send me an email, and whenever you do, I'll report back to you your grade and whatever comments within 48 hours. Okay, so it could take me up to 48 hours to send you a reply, so not to worry. If you've emailed me, you're in line, and I'll definitely be getting back to you no later than 48 hours from when you sent me the message, 2 days later. Okay, so those that have emailed me today, expect a response, if not tomorrow, then at the latest Wednesday. And I'll just keep going through the messages that I receive in the order received. I like to do it this way so that we have a little individual conversation about student grades and that I can be a little more personalized with the comments that I report back. So anyway, first essay, first midterm, all that is behind us. Now we're into the second portion of the class. We have a couple more topics, more lectures. At some point, I'll assign a second essay. And then, of course, during finals week, you have your final exam. So just touching base with you guys on those points. Long story short, midterms are graded now. As of this morning, I notified that you can email me for your score on it. So please do if and when you want it, and I'll be getting back to you within 2 days from there. Okay, so obviously we've had a little bit of a break in time since we were here together last time. So I'm going to try to remind you guys about some of the topics that we were discussing in the one meeting we had before we adjourned for spring break. And we're going to just press forward with that topic too. Okay, so we're at the part of the semester. Sorry, I'm plugging my phone really quick. Okay. Cool. So we're in the part of the semester where our current topic is this topic that I'm going to write on the board, and it's a fancy philosophy word. The word is epistemology. So to those that were active at the last lecture and took some notes, who can tell me anything about this word? What does the word epistemology mean? It's another major field or branch of philosophy, but what's the study topic when we're studying epistemology? Let me know. What do you think? Hey everybody, good to see all you guys. Question, what does the word epistemology mean? Just to set the stage. Theory of knowledge, correct, study of knowledge, okay? The study of the concept of knowledge. What is knowledge? How do we obtain it? What is the difference between really knowing something and just having a random guess that turns out to be correct? And so on. Well, to get the topic of knowledge initiated, I took you guys back in time to the world of ancient Athens, Greece. And there are some fundamentally important philosophers from that era, namely Socrates and Plato, and the earliest written descriptions of knowledge trace back to the writings of Plato and his teacher Socrates. I told you a little bit about the life and times of Socrates and Plato. Basically, long story short, Socrates was this witty, intelligent conversationalist that would engage people in discussion and debate in a town square. Some people didn't like this, though, even though he was well known for it, and it was pretty cool. But the people that were in the Athenian government that didn't like it told him he had to stop or else he would be arrested because they thought he was corrupting the youth somehow. Anyway, he kept doing it. They arrested him, put him on trial. He was convicted at trial of corrupting the youth, so then he was sentenced to death by execution, even though his young followers, including Plato, tried to break him out of prison. He refused to leave because he thought that it would establish a bad principle, that you're supposed to deviate from the law when you don't agree with one outcome of the justice system. So he stays, takes the punishment, drinks poison, basically, that they served to him. And that's the end of his life, and then Plato continues. Now, Plato writes a lot of dialogues. Socrates, his teacher, is usually the main character in the dialogues. And we still have to say a little bit about this writing of Plato called the Meno, where Socrates delivers his discussion of knowledge. I spent some time after telling you the history of Socrates' life, just going over some basic terminology that is found within epistemology. So I would like to quickly review some of those concepts because they're important for today's meeting too. So let's just try to go through them if we can. First, let me know if any of you can tell me, what does the word proposition mean? What's a proposition? What's the definition of the term proposition? What do you think? Let's see that one time, and then we can continue from that point. A proposition in the philosophic or linguistic sense is what kind of thing? Very good, Tina, that's right. Using the word not in its philosophical sense. The word proposition, like, oh, I'm going to proposition you. Would you like to take a lot of money to accompany me to Europe or something? That's not the concept of proposition as we speak in epistemology and philosophy. So a proposition is the meaning of a sentence. Now, why do we say meaning of a sentence instead of the sentence itself? Because sometimes you can have multiple sentences which convey the same information. So they're the same proposition, even though they're stated somewhat differently. Take the case of two different languages, like English and German. The same information can be expressed in both of those languages. So I can say to you right now in English, the snow is white. Or I can speak to you in German and say, der Schnee ist weiß. Der Schnee ist weiß is the same proposition as the snow is white, but it's a different sentence because it's spelled differently, the words sound different, but they don't mean different things, okay? So when you have two different statements which have the same meaning, we say that they have the same propositional content. Even in one and the same language, multiple sentences can have equivalent propositional content. Like if I say to you that I'm in Long Beach, oh, let me say it differently, Dr. Vulich is in Long Beach. I could also have said that Long Beach is the city where Dr. Vulich is. In one case, I'm the subject of the sentence, and I'm described as being in that city. In the other case, the city is the subject of the sentence, and it's described as having me as one occupant. But the two statements don't convey different information. They just switch around the subject versus the predicate. Okay, so anyway, proposition, meaning of a sentence. And it's important to start with that term and concept because propositions are the things that we either have knowledge of or don't have knowledge of. So it is propositions that we say that we know or don't know. Like take the proposition that the world is round. This is a proposition I would hope that you know. Or, I don't know, the proposition that Cal State Fullerton is in California. Another statement, which is a proposition, which I think you would know. Okay, but some things we don't know, like aliens exist. Take that proposition. Maybe that's one that we can't say we have knowledge of yet. But let me continue with this list of vocabulary terms that we're reviewing. After proposition, we talked about the term truth. So what does it mean for a proposition to be true? To have a true proposition, what does this mean? So let me know that. To say, to have a true proposition, like I'm saying to you that I'm wearing a watch, and that's true. But I could say to you that I'm wearing a hat, and that's not true. So thinking about these examples and the discussions we've already had, what do you think it is for a proposition or sentence to be true as opposed to false? Well, Jasmine, I mean, that's problematic what you're saying, though. I'm asking what the word means. You can't just repeat the word. Like if I say, what's a square, and you say it's a square, that's a circular definition. So not to worry, though, but try it again. Let's say, what does the word true mean? For a sentence to be true. Okay, so Tina, you're telling us. It's when the proposition, whatever it says, matches the facts of reality. Yeah, so when what a proposition says in the statement matches the correct facts of reality. So saying that I'm wearing a watch is something I'm saying, but I'm not just saying it because there it is. So the statement matches what's real. If I say to you that I'm wearing a hat, it is a statement, but it doesn't match the fact because as you can tell, there's no hat there right now. Okay, so when a statement matches what's real, it's truth. And when you have a statement that doesn't match what is real, then it's false. So if I told you that, I don't know, like I'm in your house right now, that's false. I could say it, but it's just not where I am. So statements could be true or false. What's the difference maker? Whether they correspond to the facts of reality. Okay, now next up, belief. What does it mean to believe a proposition? So just get that out there. What's a belief? To believe a proposition or statement is what in other words? Suppose that you believe the earth is round. And another person is like, I don't believe that. Well, I'm giving you examples to help stimulate the definition in your mind. Yeah, correct. So, but Ishmael, one thing I would say is maybe not to use the term belief in its definition again. So you might want to reword that as like to think the proposition is true, or to accept that the proposition is true. Okay, good. So when you believe a proposition or sentence, that just means that you individually consider it to be true. You think that it is true. Imagine there are two jurors, right? One juror can say, based on evidence given in court, I believe this defendant is guilty. The other juror can say, I'm sorry, but I heard the same evidence and I don't agree. I do not believe, based on that evidence, that this person is guilty. So they don't agree. The statement, Jones is guilty, juror A says, I think so. I think it's true. Or juror B says, I don't think it's true. So they have a difference of opinion about the claim. There's only one fact. Of course, he can't both be guilty and not guilty on the same charge. And so we have beliefs. They can differ from person to person, but there's only one objective set of facts. And we would hope, for the most part, that our beliefs end up being true. A couple more things. What is justification? So that's next. Justification. To have a justified belief. Meaning what? If you have a belief, but it is not justified, what's the difference between that and one that is justified? What's a justified belief? Let's hear that one. Just review, starting a meeting with some review. So, I know we probably need to warm up a bit after some time off. So, justification, Ismail, good. You say reinforcement through evidence. That's basically correct. It's when you have good reasons or evidence to back up your belief. So if I think that, say that I'm the detective and I'm claiming that I've collected evidence which shows guilt of the accused, I might say, well, I have justification for believing their guilt. For example, look at these exhibits of evidence, like the fact that their shoe print was seen at the murder scene, or the fact that a blood type that matches theirs was found at the murder scene, or maybe there's DNA evidence that links them to the crime, or maybe they had talked to other people before about wanting to commit the crime, so that establishes motive. These could all be collected pieces of evidence that give a good basis to believe that the person is guilty. But I don't think we shouldn't consider evidence to be only limited to cases of like jurisprudence and law. We do this in everyday life. Sometimes you're trying to figure out what happened to my phone? Did I let someone borrow it and forget, or did I lose it somewhere? Or what happened to my package? Was it stolen, or did the post office not deliver it? And we might, accumulate certain reasons to believe one way or the other. I don't know. Someone thinks that their partner's cheating on them, and why do they think that? Maybe they consider them to be receiving suspicious text messages or whatever, and so they have some reasons that they could offer in defense of their belief. So anyway, justification, having good reasons to believe something. Did we also talk about the term epistemic agent? Let me know that. I'm not sure if we covered it or if we ran out of time, but maybe we did, so I'm just asking. Who can tell me if we talked about the concept of an epistemic agent? If we did, maybe say what it is. If we didn't, just tell me that that's not something that we got to get into. Okay, good then. So David, what's an epistemic agent? What's the definition of that concept? An epistemic agent is what thing? What kind of thing? Okay, very good, Tina and Anthony. It is a being that is capable of having either beliefs or knowledge, yes. So my glasses, I like my glasses and everything. I like the frames, but they're not epistemic agents. They don't think, they don't perceive, they don't see anything. They help me see, but they're not epistemic agents. Okay, on the other hand, you and me and all the other members of the class are epistemic agents. We are ones that are able to have beliefs and knowledge because we are living things with perception and consciousness and all of that. Now, Isaac, you say one that had evidence to back up that it's true. Well, having evidence to back up a claim is just having justification. But the type of life form or system that is capable of processing the information, that is the epistemic agent. Okay, so human beings, as we are, can form judgments, have beliefs, and we do. I'm sure you've got a lot of beliefs that you could speak about or talk about if you wanted to, and that means you're an epistemic agent. But inanimate objects and just objects, debris, things that are made out of matter, but they don't have a brain or a nervous system, they're not epistemic agents. Okay, maybe animals are epistemic agents, some of them anyway. Some people even go further and argue that it could be that computers or future artificial intelligence could achieve consciousness. But anyway, at the very least, we know we are epistemic agents, and this marker, for example, is not. Okay, so now, what was the definition of knowledge given by those Greeks? They said that knowledge was a combination of three of those listed terminology pieces that we went over. So to the ancient Greeks and generations afterwards, knowledge was defined by these three conditions. Knowledge is equal to justified true belief. Justified true belief. So they say that when you got knowledge, all three of these conditions have to be met. If even one of them is not met, then that's not a case of knowledge. So as the definition implies, first of all, you have to think something's true. That's the belief requirement. If you don't think something is true, then even if it is, you don't know it because you don't think it is. So you have to think it's true at a minimum. But that's not enough, because if you have a false belief, certainly that's not knowledge. So the belief has to be there, but also it has to be correct. It has to be true to the facts. But even if you have a true belief, it's still not enough if it's not based on evidence or reasons that you've got. So justification is the third key ingredient. And when you have all three pieces all together, a belief which is true and is grounded on good evidence, that would be a JTB, as they sometimes say in epistemology circles. They sometimes like to use this little abbreviation. K, standing for knowledge, is equal to JTB, where each of them stands for those three criteria. J, justification, T, truth, and B, belief. So that's the equation given by these ancient Greek philosophers, which really held steady for thousands of years. Let me try to persuade you, if you're not already, that this is the basically correct definition of knowledge, okay? So I think we did talk about the concept of the multiple choice exam, because I remember a student asking a clever question at the end. Does this inform my belief not to use them on tests? But anyway, last thing about the JTB definition. If you had a quiz and there were 4 multiple choice options, and it said, I don't know, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? 1776, 1876, 1976, or 2024? You could imagine that you rule out D because it's not in history, it's in the future. But then imagine the student doesn't know the real date and they fill in B, 1876. The correct answer, by the way, guys, history lesson, Declaration was signed in 1776. So anyway, the student fills in B. Did they know the answer? No, they did not know the answer. Why didn't they get credit? Because their answer is not true. So they failed the truth condition. Also, concerning the correct answer, letter A, they didn't believe it. So what was true, they didn't believe. And what they did believe was false. So that's not a case of knowledge. Suppose, though, that they filled in the correct bubble, but only off of a random guess. They were like, I have no idea, but my name is Alex, and I like the letter A, so let's go with A. That person, let's suppose, has the right answer, and they're happy that they got the points, but they didn't really know the answer. They were just lucky to get it right. And the thing that's missing in that case is missing justification. So which type of person knew the answer when they filled it in? The person who filled it in got it right, but not just through chance and luck, rather because they could tell you, here's the exact reasons why this is the correct answer. Do you want to have context that can tell you all the dates leading up to the signing of the document? Okay, so all three have to be there. If you like metaphors that involve cooking, suppose that there were 3 ingredients necessary for baking a cake: flour, sugar, and water. Each one's needed, but by itself, it's not enough for the cake in the end. So if all you have is water, you got something that you need for it, that's a necessary key ingredient. But if you don't have the other 2 things, it's just a bucket of water. It won't turn into a cake. Same with the other 2, or even 2 out of 3. When you have all 3, though, you can make that thing. And so you can think of these as like the 3 ingredients for baking the cake of knowledge. And if any one of them is missing, it's just not going to be enough. Each criteria or component is essential to the end result, but they're not enough unless they're all combined together. So that's why they sometimes say that they're individually necessary but jointly sufficient conditions. Sufficient means enough, necessary means needed. Each one by itself is needed for K, but they're only enough when you have them all combined. Okay, now, since that was some important information that we had to kind of make sure we didn't forget, I want to come back to Plato's writing very quickly and just discuss with you some of the essentials there, because we didn't get to launch into it in full depth last time. Ismail, you're asking, can't you have knowledge about something even if you don't believe in it? No, you can't. Because if you don't believe in it, then you don't think it's true. So that's the contrary of taking the attitude towards it that would even provide the eligibility to know it. To know something, you have to, at a minimum, think it's true. So like, take the case of someone that thinks that the earth is flat. like a flat earther. Hopefully none of you would ever take that view seriously because it's absurd, it's kind of insane. But suppose someone thinks that the earth is flat. Ishmael, can we agree that that person does not know that it's round? They don't know it's round because they don't think that it's round. So they disqualify themselves from knowing it. In the same example that I just gave of the multiple choice test, this student that fills in the wrong bubble does not know the answer. And the reason they don't know has, well, there's various different reasons why not. First of all, the answer they gave is false. So they didn't get the true answer. And the true answer, they didn't believe. Because if they did believe that was the true answer, they would have filled it in. So they didn't believe the thing that was true, and the thing they did believe was false. So they're facing failure of at least two of the conditions. So anyway, I just have to tell you no. Sorry, Ismail, you can't know something you don't believe, which is kind of in a way evident. I mean, if you don't think something, then how could you ever be described as knowing it? Maybe what you're thinking about is people who like lie to themselves and deceive themselves. They say they don't like think it's true, but deep down they know it or whatever. Is that kind of what you mean? Like the person says there's no God, but like deep down they really know he exists or whatever. Anyway, that's too far afield. We don't need to get into the psychology of people that are engaged in self-deception or whatever. So straightforwardly, if you don't think it's true, you can't know it. All right, so back to the Meno. I told you guys that Plato is an ancient Greek philosopher, and his teacher is Socrates. Plato lived from 428 until 347 BC. That's before the Common Era. Born 428 years before 0 year, which is dated towards the beginning of Jesus' life. So it's very, very old stuff, 2,400 years ago. His teacher was Socrates, and we talked about his life, but just so we see his dates again, you'll remember that he was born in 469 and died in 399 BC. Okay, so anyway, that's not too important for philosophy, but just to sort of have a historical context, these are the two people we're talking about. Plato's the writer here, and he wrote this dialogue called the Meno. So we have to just dig into this a little bit and talk about that Meno. The Meno, it's called the Meno because it's a discussion that goes on between Socrates and this Greek general whose name was Meno. And many times in Plato's writings, he uses Socrates as the figurehead to advance the argument, and that's what we see here too. So it's a little discussion between old Socrates and the Greek general Meno, and what are they talking about? They're talking about our topic, knowledge, what it is. So let me read it to you. One thing that's kind of nice about this selection from our book is it's very short, and sort of like how in the beginning of the class, the ontological argument essay was just very brief, 2 pages. This is also the same way. So I can actually read most all of it to you right here. So here's how it starts on page 343. Socrates talking to Meno says this. Meno, a man who knew the way to Larissa or anywhere else that you like and went there and guided others would surely lead them well and correctly? Question. And Meno says, certainly, Socrates. So at the end of each little exchange of dialogue, I'm going to explain to you what we're being told here by the writer and the speaker. So when Socrates says a man who knew the way to Larissa or anywhere else and went there and guided others would surely lead them well and correctly, when Meno agrees to that, yes, certainly. What are they talking about? Okay, first of all, they're speaking about this city called Larissa. Larissa, L-A-R-I-S-S-A. Now, Larissa is another city in Greece that's about 100 miles away from Athens, where they're having this conversation. And Larissa is also the birthplace of Meno, the guy he's talking to. So that's why he chooses this city, because it's well known to his conversational partner here, Meno. So anyway, the question in simple terms is this. Suppose someone knows how to get to Larissa from here, from Athens, where we are at. They know how to get there. They know the route by heart. They've gone there very many times, okay? If they know how to get there, couldn't they use the knowledge of the way there to lead other people and correctly guide them to the same destination and get them there as well? And Meno says, certainly. Now, I want that to make just perfectly clear sense to you. Don't overthink it too much. All he's asking is this. If you know how to get somewhere, or if anyone knows how to get to a place, then couldn't they lead other people to that same place who have never been there, okay? Now, this example I'm going to give you used to work a lot better when we were all face-to-face, because then I could say, here we are in this classroom, and you guys know how to get to wherever you live from here, right? Well, now we're all spread out and distanced. So let's say this. Do you guys know how to get to Cal State Fullerton from where you're at right now? Probably. I mean, some of you, have you ever been to campus, or you kind of know the location? Let me get your answer on that first. Do you know how to get to CSUF from where you are? Okay, Isaac, you're saying yes. Some of you, I don't know, maybe wouldn't have ever gone to campus yet, but I'm assuming probably many of you at least know the physical directions and how to get there. So since you know how to get to there from where you're at, what if you met a new friend or something and you're like, hey, you want to see where I'm a student? Let me take you over there towards Cal State Fullerton and show you the way. So let's make Socrates' question relatable to you. It's kind of like this. If a man knows how to get to Cal State Fullerton, couldn't he lead people there correctly? And the answer given back is yes. Jasmine, what is your statement a no statement to, that you've never been to Fullerton and you don't know how to get there? Well, anyway, Jasmine, if that's true of you, then just take the example given by the author. Suppose that you know how to get to a place. I know you know how to get to your own home, Jasmine, so let's use that as the example. Since you know how to get to your house, suppose that you met someone somewhere and you're like, do you want to check out my apartment, like, I don't know, play video games or watch YouTube videos or something. You could show that person how to get to your place because you know how to get there from wherever you would be at. Okay, so the precise example doesn't matter that much. Here's the format. If you know how to get somewhere and you've been there many times and you know the way by heart, couldn't you lead another new person there? And the answer seems to be yes, of course, Socrates. Okay, so continuing from there, next question. But by the way, Jasmine, come out to Cal State Fullerton. I don't know how far away you are from campus. Maybe you can't do that. And I guess they're telling us not to go for a while anyway, but it's kind of nice to know where it's at. Anyway, though, that's just a sort of humorous aside. Continuing the dialogue, here's what Socrates says next. Well, what if someone had had a correct opinion as to which was the way, but had not gone there, nor indeed had knowledge of it? Wouldn't he also lead correctly? And again, Meno says, certainly. Good, yeah. So here's a new question that Socrates asks his friend Meno. He says, okay, now new question. Suppose someone does not know how to get there. They've never gone to Larissa, so they've never done it and they don't know how to get there. But even though they don't know the route, what if they have a correct opinion about the route? Okay, so now that requires us to open up a little discussion here. What do you think he means when he says correct opinion? Now let me tell you, correct opinion in his usage refers to 2 out of the 3 elements of knowledge without the third. So think about the synonymous meaning these words may have to the definition points of knowledge. Correct opinion, what do you think that stands for in the JTB equation? Which 2 pieces of JTB is correct opinion? What do you think? So you'll let me know. You know, justification, truth, and belief are the 3 options. What do those 2 correspond to these 2 words, if you had to guess? Correct and opinion are which 2 pieces? Yeah, that's right. Belief and truth. Okay, so correct opinion is this. It is a true belief without justification. Let me get a different pen here. Okay. Yeah, so true belief with no justification. So what he's referring to here is, suppose that a person has an opinion about something, but they have no reason to think that it's true. Nonetheless, it is true. So a true belief without evidence to justify it, or at least not sufficient evidence. I don't know, like suppose right now that I believe there's aliens out there in outer space. Maybe I'm correct. Maybe right now that is a true statement. I don't know if it's true because I haven't seen enough proof, but it could be true. Suppose that, like, you know, a billion light years away, far away, where we'll never be able to detect, there is some kind of like primordial life form, even just moss or like algae on the surface of a rock far, far away from this planet. If that's the case, then I have a true belief, but I don't have justification for believing it, because it's not like I'm seeing evidence and detailed photos and samples sent back, etc., that verify this. So sometimes we can have true beliefs that are just opinions which don't rely on solid evidence behind it. So now that's what Socrates asks Meno second. He says, let me modify the question. Now suppose that the person's never been there and they have no idea where it is. They don't know where Larissa is. But they do have a correct opinion about what the destination is. So let me give you guys some relatable example to that. What would you use in our modern world to get somewhere if you didn't really know how to get there by heart and you've never been there? Like, what kind of tool may you use? that will help assist you to get to that correct destination, even if you've never been there and you have no experience going there. You kind of know which example I'm pointing out? GPS, that's right. So Apple Maps, Isaac, what about Google Maps? It's a little bit better. But anyway, yeah, you're an iPhone guy. So you would use some type of navigation assistant. Carson, maybe take the 57, but we're not just talking about the Cal State Fullerton case here. We're talking about any arbitrary location. And if there's some destination and you've never been there, then in that case, you might use a thing like a map. In the modern day, you would have even better than a physical map, like in the days of old, because it's connected to GPS satellites that are able to position where you're at on the globe and tell you how far you have to still go and which turns to take and all that. So take the case of a person that doesn't know how to get to a destination, but they are using an accurate and a working GPS navigation system or physical map. That's like the equivalent of having the true map, but you've never used it. So you don't have reasons yet to trust it through your prior experience, having seen that it works. Okay, so he asks that to Mino. He says, say that a person doesn't know how to get to Larissa, but they have like this true and accurate map. Wouldn't that also work just as well as the knowledge that the other person has who doesn't need any map and they just go off of memory? Wouldn't the correct opinion in the form of a map that you've never used, but it is correct, wouldn't that just as well lead you correctly to the destination? And Mino says again, yes. So to kind of compare that to our modern scenario, the thing that he's saying is, if you know how to get there by heart and you don't need your GPS or Google Maps, then that's one way to lead people there. But if you do have an accurate and functioning map, you don't really need the knowledge because that can substitute for the knowledge as long as the map is correct. And Mino says, again, yes. So continuing from there, Socrates continues to says this, and as long as he has the correct opinion about that of which the other has knowledge, he will not be a worse guide than the one who knows, since he does have a true opinion, even if it isn't knowledge. And Mino agrees. He says it won't be any way worse. So continuing from there, Socrates asks this. So Mino, correct opinion is no less useful than knowledge? And then Mino says, well, to an extent, Socrates, but. Now, let me ask it before I just read it off from the text. What would you say? What is the extra benefit, if any, of knowing the route by heart instead of relying on a correct map, but you've never ever gone there yourself? Would you say that there's any advantage in having the knowledge as opposed to relying on the map? If so, let me know what you think would be the benefit of having real knowledge based on prior experience traveling there many times. So essentially my question to you is this. Is there any reason why you would prefer to know the way by heart as opposed to just using a map? Well, Isaac, you say you can get there quicker, and I would generally agree with you, but let me just play devil's advocate a little bit. Well, what if the map has the fastest route? It's not necessarily going to be quicker then, would it? Jasmine, you say because you won't experience any complications or missing turns. Good, and I see how you've added to that, Isaac, with shortcuts. River, you say technology can sometimes fail. That's also good. And Alicia, you say you know for sure how to get there and any shortcuts. It's usually faster. Okay, well, let me add something to that, which maybe hasn't been fully put out there, but I think you can probably agree with what I'm going to say. And Mino says this too, so like I'm kind of parroting what Mino says back to Socrates. But he says this, the man who has knowledge will always make it there correctly because he knows the route and he knows all these like little alternative routes in case there's like a road closure or in case, whereas the other guy might get lost along the way because even though his map is correct, since he's never used it before, he doesn't really know whether he can trust it, you see? So consider how sometimes as you're driving, posted signs have been knocked down or something, or they've been obscured. If you're not sure how to associate what the map is saying with what's going on in your environment, then you could get lost along the way, even if the map is true and correct. So since you don't have the trust that comes with having made the journey many times so that you know that the directions you are given are correct, you could easily second guess some of the directions, miss some of the turns or whatever, and get lost. So Mino says this, knowledge is better than just having the true map that you've never used, because with knowledge, you will always make it to the destination of Larissa, but with the map, you might not make it at some times because of those factors I mentioned. So here's how that discussion goes. Mino says, to some extent, Socrates, but the man who has knowledge will always succeed, whereas the one who just has a true opinion will only succeed sometimes. And now Socrates kind of presses him on that a little bit. He says to Mino, well, what do you mean, though, Mino? Won't he who has the right opinion always succeed as long as the opinion is correct? And Meno kind of backtracks a little, and he says, that does appear to be true. And now you're making me wonder, Socrates, if that's the case, why is knowledge valued so much more than the right opinion, and why are they different? And so now Socrates basically says, okay, do you really want to know? I'll tell you the answer. Why is it that knowledge is more valuable than just correct opinions without justification? So he says, do you know why you're wondering, Meno, or should I tell you? And Meno says, well, by all means, tell me. So now he says this. Socrates says, it's because you've paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, but perhaps there are none in Thessaly. Thessaly is where Meno now lives. And so he says, maybe you've never paid attention to the statues of Daedalus, Meno. So now let me explain. What are these statues? Well, there was a famous Greek sculptor at the time, and this was his name. D-A-E-D-A-L-U-S. That spells Daedalus. And this is the name of a very well-known, famous ancient Greek sculptor. Okay, so he made amazing sculptures that were like hyper-realistic to the human form. So they were prized valuables. If you were able to attain one of the priceless Daedalus sculptures, it would be extremely valuable and well prized and regarded. But the thing is this, since these statues were so realistic and lifelike, a kind of cultural myth and superstition developed around them. And here is the myth. They said of these statues made by Daedalus that they were so realistic that if you were lucky enough to find one or to obtain one, that you should try to attach them to the ground with ropes. Fasten them tightly to the ground with ropes, because what they thought was that these super realistic statues, if you don't attach them to the ground with ropes, then when you're not looking, when you're asleep at night or whatever, these statues, if there's no ropes on them, tying them to the ground, they're so realistic that they thought that they would just do what? Let me know if you can finish my thought there. So what was the myth of the Daedalus statues? Super realistic, beautiful, impressive pieces. If you get one, make sure to tie it down with some ropes. Because if you don't do that, here's the myth. That while you're not looking, what will happen? Yes, that they'll just get up and run off. That they'll run off into the night. They thought that they would become animated and leave because, you know, they were that realistic. Now, obviously, the real fact is probably they would be stolen or something in the night. But that was the myth anyway. Okay, so Socrates refers to that element of the myth, that the ropes add value to these statues, because with the ropes, it's the same beautiful statue with or without those ropes, but why would you rather have it with the ropes attaching it? Because then it won't escape and it will stay with you and you get to keep the possession. So he says that's kind of how justification is when it comes to true beliefs. He says justification has a function with your true beliefs that's similar to the function of these ropes when it comes to the statues. Essentially, he says that justification also locks down your correct opinions and prevents them from leaving your mind. So if you have a correct opinion, but you have no justification for it, then it's good while you have it, but it won't stay for long, because when you don't have evidence or reasons to back up the things you believe are true, you just don't retain the information. You forget it or you change your mind about it. Okay, so like take the example of the student who just had a lucky guess and he happened to get his multiple choice question correct on his history test. Because he didn't know why that was the right answer, he will not remember that that's the correct answer. So if you tested him again in like a year, unless he's read about this topic in the meantime, he won't be able to remember what the right answer is, and he probably will give you the wrong answer then. So true beliefs, when they're not based on anything, you forget them, you change your mind about them, and on and on. But once the true belief is grounded and based on evidence, then it sticks with you and you hold on to it. So like once you know detailed information about why that is the correct answer, you don't just fill it in randomly correct on the one day of the test, but you have knowledge, and the knowledge never goes away. So it's an analogy, guys. The ropes are to the statues as what is to what. Can you complete that analogy? What is the metaphor that the ropes are to stand for? The ropes symbolize what factor within the definition of knowledge? Let me ask you this. The ropes are meant to represent or symbolize in his discussion what concept? Justification, yes. So the ropes are like the solid evidence and reasons that backs up your beliefs. And these statues, if they don't have any ropes, then that's like the equivalent metaphorically of true beliefs which don't have any evidence locking them down. So true belief with no evidence is like these statues with no ropes. They're here for now, and that's great, but they probably won't stay very long, so you better tie them down with ropes. Now here's what he says, and I'll read it. He says, maybe you've paid no attention to the statues of Daedalus, Meno. Maybe perhaps there are none in Thessaly. Meno says, what do you mean when you say that? Socrates says, well, they too will run away and escape if you do not tie them down. But they do remain in place if they are tied down. Meno's a little confused. He says, so what? Socrates says, well, to acquire an untied work of Daedalus is not worth much. It's like acquiring a runaway slave because it will not stay in place. But it is worth much if it is tied down because his works are very beautiful. Now, what am I thinking of when I say this? True opinions. Because true opinions, as long as you have them, are a great thing, and all they do is good, but not willing to stay for long, and they will escape from a man's mind. So they are not worth much until you tie them down by giving an account of the reason why. And that is as we previously agreed. After they are tied down, in the first place they become knowledge, and then they remain in place. That is why knowledge is valued more than a correct opinion. Knowledge differs from correct opinion because it is tied down by justification. Meno says, yes, by Zeus, Socrates, it seems to be true. By Zeus, that's the equivalent of by God, because that's like the Godhead, the Greek pantheon of gods. So Socrates says, indeed, I too speak as one who does not have knowledge, but is guessing. However, I certainly don't think I'm guessing that true opinion is different from knowledge. If I claim to know anything, and I would make that claim about few things, I would put that down as one of the things that I do know. And then Meno finishes by saying, rightly so, Socrates. And that's the end. So what we learned here in this discussion is that the Greeks thought of knowledge as a combination of true belief and justification. But the question was asked by Socrates to Meno, why would you rather have knowledge than to just have a correct opinion? Because if the opinion is correct, that's all you really care about in the end, right? If you have the right map, who cares if you know how to get there? If you fill in the right bubble on the test, who cares if you actually knew the reason that it was the right answer? But Socrates says, no, there is something better about having knowledge of the correct result rather than just having a correct opinion about it. Because with knowledge, you also add justification into the mix. And justification is having solid reasons to base the opinion on. That prevents the opinion from changing or from being forgotten. So in the same way that these ropes lock down the Daedalus statues so that they stay with you, justification locks down true opinions and prevents them from leaving your mind. I talked to you before about the question of aliens and whether they exist. As a fan of science fiction and I guess somewhat a student of science, I believe that there's a good chance that there is life outside of the planet Earth. But I might change my mind on that question multiple times in a given year. Maybe right now I'm thinking there's got to be something out there in this big universe. Tomorrow I watch like a really depressing film and I'm like, man, it's just lucky there's even life on one planet. But what would cause me to stop waffling back and forth on the question if evidence came forward which conclusively established the existence of these life forms? After that, and having examined the evidence, I would not change my mind again. So justification secures and keeps in place a correct opinion so that it doesn't escape or change. So when we also talk about justification in our everyday life, if we do, we employ linguistic metaphors that sort of recall to mind the example of ropes that Socrates has given. So when you say you have really good reasons to back your beliefs up, even that, backing up the belief, like backing it up, stabilizing it into the ground with ropes. Or sometimes we say my belief is really well based on something. My belief isn't just random, it's based on good evidence. Well, with the ropes base the statue to the base of the ground by tethering them to the ground. Or sometimes we say, my beliefs are grounded on evidence. I have very good grounds for these beliefs, just as the ropes ground the statues physically. So the metaphor has some application to common ways that we speak about having justification and reason. Okay, so there you guys go. Opening move with our meetings on epistemology is to list out that Greek definition and to go through the discussion given by Plato, Socrates, and Meno. But the thing about it, that definition of knowledge was the consensus view for thousands of years, from the time of Plato and Socrates, like 400 BC, all the way up until 1963, when out of nowhere, this American philosopher named Edmund Gettier published a very short paper which basically revolutionized the thinking about knowledge because it basically showed that the long-standing dominant view that it's justified true belief is not quite correct, or that it's somehow incomplete. So, it was solid for thousands of years, but then Mr. Edmund Gettier, American philosopher, 1963, published this tiny short paper which was capable of showing that this analysis of knowledge is not quite right. So ever since Gettier did his thing, we're living in the post-Gettier era since 1963, and that's kind of strange because today we don't think we have the exact clear definition of knowledge anymore. And that's a problem in a way, because something that lies so deeply at the heart of all fundamental human concepts and important information is at some level undefined still. But anyway, we're going to talk about this man. So Edmund Gettier is his name. Edmund Gettier, so he was born in 1927, on Halloween actually, October 31st, and he's still alive. So Edmund Gettier, legend of the philosophy game, still out there. And this paper was from 1963, and what it's called is justified true belief knowledge? Question mark. Like, is it though? From 1963. Is justified true belief knowledge? So we're going to try and break down this paper by Gettier. And just a little more about Mr. Gettier. He's definitely an interesting figure in modern philosophy because he published this revolutionary paper, which is, by the way, very short. And you'd see that if you read it in the book. It's less than 2 pages in length, so very compact, but very dense in what it says. And this is the only thing he ever published in his life. So that's also kind of unique, because oftentimes people who publish something like very important and paradigm shifting, they have a whole volume of other work. But with Gettier, not only was his piece extremely short, like 2 pages, but that's the only thing in his life that he ever published professionally. So it's like he wrote this tiny small paper, which basically opened a can of worms, showing us that we don't know what knowledge actually is anymore. And he doesn't solve the problem. It's not like he says, and you want to know what it is? Here's what it is. No, he just says the existing definition is off, and then he just kind of drops the mic and says, that's it. Nobody knows what knowledge is anymore, and doesn't publish anything else after that. So some of you might have read like Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger in high school. I think that's sometimes required reading in English classes. And people talk about him as like a writer who barely wrote anything. It's really just Catcher in the Rye, 12 stories, and 1 or 2 other things. But he had a huge impact on English literature. It's sort of like, I guess, Gettier is kind of like a philosophical equivalent of that, except he wrote even less. I mean, it's just 2 pages, literally, but it's considered paradigm shifting, very revolutionary paper. Okay, so Gettier, even though he didn't publish more, he has a very long career as a philosophy professor, advising students, teaching classes, and all of that. But anyways, yeah, it's a great book, isn't it, Jack? I always liked that one too as a student. Okay, so is justified true belief knowledge? Let's get into it. What Gettier shows in this paper, basically, is through the consideration of a few hypothetical scenarios, he thinks he can show the reader, all of us and whoever else reads it, that the definition justified true belief is not a complete definition of knowledge. He basically shows us examples in which a subject has a justified true belief and yet still fails to have knowledge. And if that can happen, if you could have JTB without K, then that means that this is not an accurate definition, because if justified true belief equals knowledge, we should never have an example where you have all those conditions met and still don't know. So he's basically showing us that justified true belief is not a full stated definition. It's JTB plus question mark, something extra. And that's what has been the puzzle to solve for generations of epistemologists since then. Okay, so let me try and explain to you his cases. Before we fully state those Gettier cases, there's 2 preliminary points that have to be first mentioned, and he does mention them himself. So 2 preliminaries to get into his examples. Now this is Edmund Gettier's work, so just know that we've moved on from Plato and we're talking about Edmund Gettier. 2 preliminaries. Number 1, it is possible, it's not necessarily the norm, maybe it's the exception, but it's at least possible in theory, to have a justified false belief. Okay, so you see this concept or statement, think about it, and tell me if you can, what could you imagine to be a real or made-up situation where a person could have a belief which is based on good evidence, but it still was false? Evidence usually leads us to the truth, but sometimes evidence can be misleading, or sometimes we can misinterpret it. So can you think of any possible or real scenario where a person would have good evidence, but they would reach the wrong conclusion? So they would have justification, but their belief would still be false. Any example that you can think of? Let's see what you have, and then we'll discuss. I have examples too, obviously. We're just going to explore this concept or statement for a moment, because it's one of the things mentioned by Gettier at the beginning. Okay, Tina, you say a framed crime. Good example, sure. Sometimes it doesn't even necessarily need to be that someone was framed. It could just be that, witness testimony and stuff picked out the wrong person. There have been miscarriages of justice, like people convicted at trial that DNA evidence was later used to reverse the verdict. But take the case of the jurors who voted for guilt. You could say that based on the evidence they saw in court, they did reach the conclusion of guilt, but they just made the wrong conclusion based on the evidence. Nonetheless, you could have still looked at it as a justified but false belief. So Carson, you say O.J. Simpson, cause of the glove. Well, I don't know. I mean, you have to specify which belief it is that the person has, which is false. Is the justified false belief in this case that O.J. didn't commit the crime? Probably in all likelihood, just because DNA and blood was all over the place, and motive. Plus, we've learned a lot about that case in the generations since. But some argue anyway, and of course the verdict was that there was at least reasonable doubt. But yeah, good example. It's one particular example, but the format of the example is really all that matters. It can be possible for someone to reach a false conclusion, but still based on good evidence. I don't know, take another case. Spencer, isn't that it? You talk about the Loch Ness Monster. I don't know. I suppose what you're saying is there's no such thing as the Loch Ness Monster, but there could be some people who believe that there's evidence in favor of it. And so those that believe in it based on this whatever evidence might claim they have a justified belief, but it's still false. Okay, sure. Take little kids that believe in Santa. If you ask them what's the reason you believe in it, they'd probably be able to tell you reasons. Like, okay, well, my parents say, and I see him at the mall, and there's a lot of movies about him, and et cetera, et cetera. So that would be another justified false belief, perhaps. Surprise party. Your friends are telling you that they're all out of town, and someone's going to just say, hey, I need you to come by my apartment to pick up some shoes that you left behind. And the person's been in the midst of an elaborate deception, so they think their friends are all gone. And they're justified in believing that because maybe their friends told them, oh, yeah, we're all leaving on a work trip. But when they get there, it's like, surprise, we're all here at your surprise party. So another case where the justified belief is my friends are out of town, but it was false that was not the case. Okay, anyway, so millions of examples, really infinite examples abound. Justification usually leads us to the truth, but obviously there can be exceptions, and I'm just mentioning some of these exception type cases here. Okay, so one point to remember. It's possible, not exactly the ordinary case, but at least the possibility to have a justified false belief. Okay, so next, and one more preliminary point. Now this one's a little complicated looking, okay? I'm just gonna say that because it's a little technical and logic sort of speak, but once I explain it to you, I'll bring it down to earth and it won't be that bad. But it's called the closure principle, okay? And this is a well-known principle in logic and epistemology. It's got some technical terms in it, but I'll explain them. So here's what it does say. It says, if S, and now S just stands for a person, like an epistemic agent. So if S is justified in believing some statement P. Now I'm labeling it P as a sort of variable because it's a placeholder. This could cover any number of statements. The sky is blue, the earth is round. My friend was born in 2005, whatever the case may be. P is just a stand-in for some given proposition. Okay, so, and S is a stand-in for some given subject. This could be me, you, or whoever. Okay, so that's why we're using these letters for the moment. So again, if S is justified in believing P, and P, that proposition, entails another one, and we will label that one Q. Okay, so here's what it says so far. If S is justified in believing P and P entails Q, and, next part, S, the subject, deduces Q from P, then, in that case, the subject S is justified in believing that Q. Okay, we could have interposed the word also in between is and justified. That's not essential. Maybe I'll write it here. Okay, that doesn't change the meaning at all. So let me read it and then I'll explain. It says this, the closure principle. If S is justified in believing P, so S is a person who has good reason to believe some statement, and suppose that this statement he's justified in believing entails another one, Q. Suppose that the subject deduces that second statement based on the first. In that case, S, the subject, is now justified also in believing the second proposition, Q. Now, for this to kind of be clear for you, we have to make clear what the word entailment means, what it is for one proposition to entail another. Okay, now entailment is a logical relationship that holds between two propositions. And it's a word that I think you've probably heard or used in some cases in life, but now we're going to kind of focus on it for a moment together. So let me ask you this. How do you think this definition is to be completed? If I say, if A entails B, and A and B are just two propositions or sentences, if A entails B, then if A is true, B must. What do you think is the end? So say that A entails B. What that means is that if we are to assume the truth of A, then that guarantees what about B? Since A entails B, under the assumption that A is true, that means that since B is entailed by or follows from A, what must be the case with B? So when A entails B, the truth of A guarantees that B is also true. Correct, thank you. So if A entails B, then if A is true, B must also be true. So entailment is one word. We sometimes have a synonym, which is implication. We can say that if A implies B, then if A is true, B would also have to be true. So now let's try and apply this concept of entailment to a specific example. I'm going to tell you a proposition which is a fact. And the fact is that Dr. Vulich was born in the 1980s. You know your decades, right? I was born in the 80s. So tell me, can you think of anything that that entails? So let A be, Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s. What could be a statement B that has to be true, which is entailed by that? So something that must be true, given the fact that I was born in the 80s. There's a lot of things that that entails, but maybe one of them you could point out. Something that has to be guaranteed to be true, since I just told you one fact, that I was born at that particular time in the world. So since I was born in the 80s, come on, Jasmine, let's think a little bit more carefully here. To be born in the 80s means that you say that that implies that I'm in my 40s. Can anybody maybe explain or say something about this? If I was born in the 80s, it does not entail that I'm in my 40s. And by the way, I'm not in my 40s yet, okay? Why would it be true? Why do you think I have to correct your example, Jasmine? It's just math. But someone else or you or anyone, just tell us, because I don't want us to get off on the wrong foot with that example. That does not follow from A, if A is I was born in the 80s. So why not? Well, Jasmine, I mean, you should know. If I was born in the 80s, what years encompass the 80s? It's 80 through 89, isn't it? Okay, so subtract 2021 from the later years of the 80s, and they don't amount to 40. Okay, 40 years ago is 1981 or 1980, right? So the only way I could be over 40 is if I was born in those 2 years of the 80s. But if I was born in 82 through 89, then I would be still in my 30s. Doesn't that make sense? So from the fact that I was born in my 40s, it does not logically follow. Sorry, from the fact that I was born in the 80s, it does not logically follow that I'm currently in my 40s, since not all years within the 80s are 40 years before. Okay, but David, your example makes good sense. I have to be in my 30s, don't I, if I was born in the 80s? Because even if I was born on December 31st of 89, then I would today be 30, okay? So at a minimum, that's a given. I was born in the 80s, therefore it entails that I'm at least 30. Now, what the closure principle is saying is this. If you notice that a second statement logically follows from an initial one, okay, and you already had good evidence to believe the first one, then that justification transfers over to the second statement. Okay, so can we agree that you're all justified right now in believing that I was born in the 80s? Yes, you are. You believe this because I told you, and you're hearing it from the man himself. So that's good evidence. If someone asks you, how did you know that he was born in the 80s? You could say he told me in his lecture. So that's evidence. You're now justified in believing that. Suppose that you're a fan of logic and math or whatever, and you just do this little deduction. You're like, well, haha, if he was born in the 80s, it logically implies that he must be at least 30. You would then be justified in believing the second statement too, because whatever evidence you had for the first one is the same evidence that would serve for the second, because after all, the second one has to be true if the first one is. Okay, so you're justified in believing that I'm at least 30 because you're justified in believing A, which is the statement that that implies. Okay, here's another example. It's a little weird, but I'm passing it along to you because it was given to me by my own advisor back when I was in graduate school, Sven Berneker, great guy. So he said, you've all petted a dog, I'm sure. So when you're petting a dog, you'd be fully justified in believing that you're petting a dog because you would feel the fur and you would see the animal and all that. So that's perceptual evidence, high quality evidence, the same evidence you have right now that you're watching a YouTube lecture because you could see it, okay? Now, you're petting a dog. Now, one thing that entails is that you're petting a mammal because all dogs are mammal. Okay, so suppose that you're a fan of logic and you're like, well, I'm fully justified in the belief that I'm now petting a dog. And since that entails that I'm petting a mammal, aha, I'm also justified in believing that I'm petting a mammal. So this is just a little logic thing. If you have evidence for one statement and then you deduce something from it, that second statement is also justified because the evidence transfers through to the second statement when you do a deduction. Okay, so that's what the closure principle says. If a subject has already got reasonable belief in P and that entails another thing, then when you deduce the second thing from the first, you are now also justified in believing the second one. Okay, so these two preliminaries are given by the author to start his paper, and then after that, we're ready to launch into these Gettier cases, these famous Gettier cases. One other thing I guess I'll say before I launch into those cases is that he also, at the beginning of his paper, lists the general definition of knowledge. He lists this classical definition because that's what he's going to criticize and try and show problems with, the one that we've already learned, which is knowledge is justified true belief. The only thing I wanted to say about that so that you don't get confused is that when he writes about that on page 345, he provides three different statements of the definition of knowledge. But they're not different definitions, they're just different ways of wording the same definition. So they're just slightly reworded. Like for example, in one, it says, a subject S knows that P, just in case. In the book, there's these capital letters, IFF. Just so that you know, in logic, that stands for the abbreviation for if and only if. And the English translation of that logical connective is just in case. So one of the stated definitions of knowledge provided on 345 says that if a subject S knows that P, that's just in case P is true, S believes that P, and S is justified in believing that P. So he just spells out the three conditions in more fully stated language. P is true, that's the truth condition, T. S believes that P, that's the belief condition, B. S is justified in believing that P, that's the justification condition, J. Now he says sometimes people will play with different ways of wording the same definition, but they amount to the same thing. So another author, Chisholm, put it this way. A subject S knows that P just in case S accepts P. Now S accepts P is just synonymous for the belief requirement, because to accept the proposition is to think it's true. Number two, S has adequate evidence for P. So that was Chisholm's phrase. But having adequate evidence for the proposition is yet again to believe that, or sorry, to have justification for it. So adequate evidence is the same as justification criteria. And then P is true, the third condition, same exact wording. So that's clearly the truth requirement. So anyway, if you write an essay on this later, because I'm going to assign topics in a few weeks, and you're reporting on this definition of knowledge that he describes, don't mess it up and say he tells us there's 3 different definitions. There's just one definition, and he says in the literature, you may sometimes see it expressed variously as S believes that P or S accepts that P. You might sometimes see people saying that S has adequate evidence for P. In other cases, they'll just say justification. Overall, we're just going to stick to our clear stated definition. Knowledge is justified true belief. But now we're ready. So let's get into these Gettier cases. Next, what Gettier will try to do is show through the illustration of some hypothetical scenarios that a person could have a justified true belief but still fail to have knowledge. Therefore, the definition that we were working with for thousands of years is not quite right. So here's the first Gettier case. Gettier case 1. And it's often labeled with this little name, Smith and Jones job hunt. Okay, so we're now going to be treated to a hypothetical scenario, not much different than much of what we've read throughout this semester. It's a mainstream feature of philosophy to use thought experiments, hypotheticals to advance points within an argument. So keep that in mind. The point of the example is not that it be relatable, realistic, or anything, just that it explain certain key features of the conceptual argument the author's making. So anyway, Smith and Jones job hunt. Here's how it goes. We got a couple characters in this little story. First of all, there's Smith and Jones. Here's Smith, Smith. Here's the other guy, Jones. And what are these two guys doing? Well, they're hunting for a job. They're competing, actually, against each other as the finalists for a position at a company that they both applied to. So you know how it goes sometimes if you've ever had these type of interviews, or even if you haven't, let me just fill you in. Sometimes you go through multiple rounds of interviews, and they narrow it down to 2 finalist candidates. And then the hiring committee or boss, whatever, will have to choose between those 2 finalists. And that's what Smith and Jones are. They're applying for a job. They will not both receive the job. It's only one open position. So in the end, one of these 2 candidates will be eliminated and the other will be chosen by the boss. Now here's the boss. He's also within the story. Boss. I gave him a giant head. Why? I don't know. Because these are stick figures. I wanted to at least look a little different than Smith and Jones. So there's our boss. Now, as we go through the case, let me erase this a little, create some room. I'm telling you that they finished their interviews, okay, with the boss. This guy conducted the interviews for both. And Smith has developed a belief in his mind. So let me show you this belief with a thought bubble. And he doesn't necessarily say this, but he's thinking it. He thinks it's true. And here's the thought. It's this thought. Jones, the other guy, will get the job. Jones will get the job. And there's 2 parts. So the first part is that he thinks Jones will get the job. But also, in addition, he thinks, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. I'll explain. Okay, so Smith believes this. And to give a little label to the belief, the proposition, let's call it D, because the author Gettier does. So here is the belief labeled D, and it is this belief. Jones will get the job. Not me, but Jones. And Jones, the other competitor, has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, why does Smith believe that? Okay, let me tell you exactly why. Because he has clear reason to believe this. First of all, after the interviews were conducted, let's say that now they're waiting in the waiting room, Smith and Jones, for the final announcement of the job offer. But let's suppose that Jones leaves the room for just a moment, use the bathroom or check his phone, something like this. So now in the lobby, it's just Smith. And into that waiting room, let's say the boss just ducks in for a minute, and he comes over to Smith and he says, "Hey, Smith, I just want to tell you something, okay? This is just between us for the moment. Keep it hush-hush, but basically, I'm sorry to disappoint you, my friend, but I've basically decided that Jones is the better fit for our company. He's the more well-suited candidate, and I like what he has to offer us. So I'm not making the formal announcement yet. I want you to stay here and wait until I can come back and make this official. But I'm just letting you know, kind of heads up, I'm not going to take you. I'm going with Jones. Don't tell him, though, and just kind of wait until I come back, right? So you heard, right, what I just said. Smith, in a private moment after interviews, boss comes over, grabs him and says, hey, let me tell you, I'm just going to hire Jones. So Smith's disappointed. You know, he wanted the job, but he's told that Jones is going to get it. Okay. So boss is gone. Smith comes back. Sorry, Jones comes back from like bathroom. And Smith, totally random. This part's weird, okay, admittedly. But Smith says over to Jones, hey, Jones, I got a question. I'm just curious about something. Do you have any coins in your pocket? Jones is like, actually, yeah, I do have some coins in there. And Smith says, how many? Jones is like, what? Smith says, yeah, how many coins in your pocket? You know what? Let me just count them. Is that cool? Let me count them. So here's what happens. Smith goes to Jones, and Smith counts the coins of Jones' pocket. He does. So it's like this. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's one more. 10. Cool. You got 10. Thank you. I just wanted to count them and know. Anyway, it's kind of strange, but thank you very much. And Jones is like, okay, fine. So you heard what happened, right? Smith says to Jones, I'm going to count the coins in your pocket. I want to know how many there are. And he counts how many? 10. So that's the reasons behind this belief. The belief that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. What's the basis? What's the evidence for him to believe that? Well, number one, the statement given by the boss to Smith that he will hire Jones. That's why he believes the first part. Why does he believe the second part? As I just described, he physically counts the coins out of Jones' own pocket. So that's a very clear reason to believe that he does have the 10 coins. So Smith has now got this justified belief, guys. Letter D, based on the evidence that I mentioned. Now, here's where the closure principle thing is going to kick in, guys. Smith, let's say he's a fan of logic and that kind of thing. So he deduces from D a very similar statement with just a slight change to the wording. So D entails, let's call it E, because Gettier does in the essay. E is going to be a very similar statement to this, but here's the only difference. We remove reference to the name of Jones and replace it with the generic reference of the man who gets the job. Okay, so E just says this. The man who gets the job has what? Has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, let's remember the stuff that I was just saying a moment ago about the closure principle and the concept that when you deduce a statement, which is entailed by a prior statement, then the justification transfers through to the second one. So we already made the whole example where Smith is justified in believing this based on the original evidence that was described. And don't you guys see, hopefully you can see, E is entailed by D. D entails E. If this is true, if Jones gets the job and he has 10 coins in his pocket, then that does imply that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket because it will be Jones, because he does have those number of coins. So Smith deduces E from D, and the closure principle says that because he was already justified in believing D, what's the status of his belief in E? Can you guys tell me that piece? That'll be maybe our last thing today, and we'll pick up on this on Wednesday. There's just a few more pieces to finish, but we're very close. Nonetheless, I want to know that. What is the status of Mr. Smith's belief with respect to E? Since he has deduced E from D, and he was justified in believing D, we are now able to say that he has what when it comes to E? What's my answer here? For Smith to believe E is what type of belief? Go ahead, let me know. The closure principle. Look at what it says. Just put the pieces together. If you are justified in believing a proposition, and that proposition entails another, and you deduce the second one from the first, then you are also what in believing the second one? No, Derek, the answer is not the word true. It's a different word. The subject, Smith, is, well, E would have to be true if D was. But the closure principle says that when you are justified in believing an initial proposition, and then you deduce a second one from the first, what is the status of your belief in the second proposition? Just read the closure principle. The second belief would then also be what? Not the definition of entailment, but the closure principle. That's right, Alicia, justified. So this entire little initial setup is just to show you how it is that Smith arrives at a justified belief in proposition E. Smith is justified in believing E. What does E say? That the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. What's his evidence for believing that? Two things. The boss telling him, I will hire Jones, and Smith on the side counting the coins in Jones' pocket, counting that there's 10. So on the basis of those two pieces of evidence, he has deduced that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket, and that belief is justified. But we're not done yet, okay? So we'll pick up with this at the beginning on Wednesday. The whole main plot twist that kind of brings this case to a conclusion is still left hanging out there. So I'm going to leave you in suspense till Wednesday, and then we'll finish this essay then. But in between now and then, I would ask you to try and read the writing of René Descartes in our textbook. That's the next author in the lecture series. It's not too bad, but we're talking about pages 351 up until 358. Okay, so that's our lecture topic on Wednesday. As I said before, I've graded all the midterms, and I'm in the process of responding to student email requests for grades. So if you have emailed me as of today, since I sent the announcement out, not to worry. I'll be back with you and giving you a reply no later than 48 hours, 2 days from the time that you sent it. So please feel free to email me with your score requests, and I can let you know your grades on that. Okay then, so are we all good, guys? That's the end of our time for today. So I think we made some good progress on the topics, but let me know if we're all good, and then I'll close the stream for the moment, and we'll be back on Wednesday. Let's see. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you so much. Perfect. All right, great. Thanks so much, Maria, and everyone else that's here. Try your best, guys, to stay consistent with your attendance, and make sure to read these essays. That's the best that you can do to put yourself in great position to do well. So thanks, everyone, and I'll see you back on Wednesday then. I'll be in touch by email if you need anything. Okay, have a great one, and see you then.